Hey, you're listening to the Bandwagoners. My name is Andy Cole.
And my name's Justin Boniface, and we're bringing you news and notes from around the NHL. Stanley Cup Finals.
Stanley Cup Finals, the last show of the year as far as the hockey game itself is concerned. This is a huge show, obviously, because we just finished round 3. We took a little more time off, longer time off than we expected, because we really wanted to see how these series ended up.
Yeah, we were going to record, and there was really a possibility of only 1 or 2 games left to be played in a series, so waited it out, and now to wrap up the series. I mean, the Pittsburgh-Boston one was over so quickly, we were kind of scrambling.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. It's totally true. Before we go into the series, we should quickly talk about a bit of news from around the NHL. The Edmonton Oilers hired Dallas Eakins as their head coach the other day.
So they made that move a little bit prior to Vancouver's plans, I think. Yeah. So that's now not an opportunity for them.
No, Eakins were in they were in the sights for the Canucks. Even I was saying in the last couple of shows he would be an ideal candidate. I do agree he is a better fit in Edmonton because this is his first time coaching in the NHL. He's used to coaching younger players. Yeah. He's used to lighting a fire under younger players, and we're better to do with that in Edmonton. I mean, they just have a plethora of young talent. I do think he's a better fit in Edmonton than in Vancouver. Vancouver obviously is a much more seasoned group, older guys, so I can understand why Edmonton was more attractive to him.
But he was your number one candidate.
He was, but I mean, rumors out of the Canucks organization are saying that he actually wasn't their primary target like some had thought. He did go in for a second interview. He's the first coach to do that, so obviously they thought very highly of him, but apparently they're still heavily targeting the coach out of Phoenix, Dave Tippett, who is currently under contract with them still. So he would have to get out of that somehow. But apparently Tippett is a primary candidate for the Canucks.
And is that something that you agree with?
Well, he's always been more of a defensive coach in my eyes, but prior to his time in Phoenix, even in Dallas, he deployed a much more offensive system. He only had to really alter his game plan into defensive posture when he went to Phoenix, just because they don't have the offensive talent. Yeah. Like, he didn't have a choice, but it brought them to the conference finals a couple years ago, right?
Fair enough, true.
The guy knows how to adapt. I think he is a terrific coach. Not the most entertaining soundbite, but I think he's a terrific coach, and I think he is going to be very, very popular if he gets picked up by the Canucks. Announced today that Canucks are interviewing John Tortorella. Yeah. Which a lot of people in Vancouver are questioning. There are reports that this is more of just an interview to get his opinion on what he feels of the organization, his opinion of the organization. Not necessarily that the Canucks are targeting him as a coach. We discussed this last show. Yeah. I'm not at all opposed to him trying out for a couple of years here.
We actually managed to come up with some good reasons why you would want him in Vancouver. But.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be totally opposed to it, but I'm still not completely sold on it either, and it sounds like more than not around the city of Vancouver's people would not be happy with him there. Yeah. Just because he creates unnecessary drama in a city on a team that's had so much anyways over the past few years.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way the media works in this city is they will take any story and blow it up by 1,000,000. Yeah. So I don't know if Tortorella is necessarily the right fit, and I really realistically think it's unlikely he probably will end up here. But I can understand why Gillis wants to target everyone and he wants to interview everyone, because he wants to see what coaches think of his team and what people can add to it, right? Yeah. So I understand the strategy behind it. It's still totally up in the air who they grab.
They have lots of time to decide.
Yeah, ideally they want somebody in place by the free agent frenzy beginning July 5th.
And you never know. I mean, like, there's also the opportunity of Dan Bylsma not being with the Penguins anymore, so maybe a little bit of patience is required.
That's true. If that were to happen, Bylsma is a terrific coach. I mean, he's definitely someone the Canucks would target as well, absolutely. So, yeah, now going on to the series, neither turned out the way we thought, although one more surprising than the other. We'll get into, in my opinion, the better but also the less storyline-esque series of the two. Yeah. Chicago beats LA in 5. Yeah. We both picked 7.
We both picked 7, I think, just based on hard paper facts. When Chicago was up 2-0 on the Los Angeles Kings, I had a discussion with somebody at work, and he was saying, LA, like, undefeated at home, same story as San Jose, and I said, LA will win one. LA will win one of their home games. Two games is like they're a good team, but they're not. What's the word I'm looking for? They're like Chicago. They're not as versatile. They're not as energetic or passionate, especially down. You can tell the energy was out. Yeah. Heading back home, and even though they won Game 3, they won it by the skin of a hair and without Seabrook.
Yep.
Or Keith.
Keith.
Sorry.
Yeah, Keith got the suspension.
That's right. So game 3 was like,
they rallied around that. And
exactly.
They won.
Yeah. So there you go. So
there definitely is the heart and soul element to it for sure. I mean, LA has some character guys, but they definitely over the course of the entire playoffs didn't have as many guys step up as they did in their cup run.
That's right.
I mean, they had guys have their moments. Voinov had a great coming out playoff run. Like, he was probably their best defenseman.
Jonathan Quick wasn't who he was in the previous series.
No, he was stellar the first 2 series. Not arguably. He was
still great.
He was their best player in the first 2 series. And although he was terrific in this series against Chicago, he wasn't as good as in previous rounds.
And he wasn't as good as Crawford.
No, Crawford was terrific. Crawford is... He reminds me not in his play style so much, but more in terms of how steady he is, a lot like an Anderson out of Ottawa. Like, he's just so positionally sound. He's not an overly flashy goaltender, but he just plays the position so perfectly that he doesn't make very many mistakes.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I thought Crawford was a much better goalie out of the two of them. I thought Bickle was stellar. He led the team in points completely, although he was their most physical player and is their most physical player, which will come in handy against Boston.
They're going to need it.
As they're going to soon find out, it's going to come in handy against Boston. Bickle was amazing. Like, he sort of molded himself in the last round into this power forward role. Did a lot of power play time with Kane and Taves, which really paid off for him. I think he's got like 9 points or something like that. He's doing really well. He's doing really well for them. And he's a guy that I would not have pegged to play that role.
Well, Chicago was doing well with that line all season, right? I mean, they had Steckel, Bickle, and Shaw going, and that line's checking and turnover rate was spectacular, and they were getting goals because of it. And the more time you have with the puck in the NHL in an NHL surrounding, the better you're going to get with it. And Bickle has taken that to another level in this postseason.
And that's the line on the Blackhawks, which is most comparable to the style that the Bruins play. So that line is going to have a very important role in the final round, and they're really going to have to showcase their checking ability. Not necessarily to shut down Boston's offense, because they have a more even offense throughout the lineups. They don't have 1 or 2 players that score more than the others. They're very evenly matched. From the first to the fourth line, Boston's strength has always been how easily the lines can be rolled, because they're all deep. They're all deep lines.
Yeah.
So the trick, I think, for Chicago will be ultimately to use their checking line to try and shut down that consistency between all 4 of Boston's lines, right? Question is, can they do it? Boston versus Pittsburgh. That was the interesting one.
That was quite funny to watch. Just one game after the other. If we were, I know we said 7, but if we were going to call anybody to sweep it, it would have been the Penguins. Like, that was,
if anything,
that was ridiculous. But it's the curse. It's the curse of just expecting to win. It's the curse of knowing that this series should be over statistically. And as soon as you know that in the back of your head, you don't try, you don't play. And even Crosby didn't play great hockey really until Game 4.
Yeah.
He was pointless. Not to say most of his team wasn't pointless, but him and Malkin both went pointless, and they needed to show up big time.
Malkin were both pointless, and they were both shut down. Crosby has never had a 2-game pointless streak before in the playoffs. He's pretty much a point per game in all of his playoff games since he's been in the NHL. Great record in the playoffs. He's never had a pointless streak like this before.
4 games straight.
Him and Malkin were both completely shut down by the Bruins. Bylsma could not adapt to Julien's system, and they could not generate offense from it. Granted, Rask was also stellar.
Yes, he was, yeah.
But Pittsburgh just didn't have an answer.
No, and Pittsburgh didn't. And like, one thing that we, I think, gravely overlooked was the goaltending difference. I mean, we did say Vokun is not going to steal you games, and Rask will, and we made that quite abundantly clear. But they had nobody to fall back on, because Bylsma clearly wasn't going to put Fleury. And although he's made the statement now saying Fleury's our number 1, yeah, that's easy to say when you have no hockey left to play, my friend.
I find that confusing. There's lots of rumors that they might even consider buying Fleury out now and relying on Vokun for the last 2 years of his career, and getting a younger guy to learn under Vokun until he's ready to go. There's even, of course, because this happens with every team that needs a goalie, even now Luongo rumors surfacing, going to Pittsburgh potentially.
That would be funny.
Well, it'd be great for Vancouver, because the return would probably be quite good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we both picked it would be a 6-7 game series, and they swept them. The Bruins swept the Pittsburgh Penguins. Who would have predicted that in the entire world of the NHL that would happen, based on how well Pittsburgh did this year, how incredibly well they loaded up for the playoffs. Shearer still looks like a genius, because even though they got knocked out in 4, they still didn't technically lose anyone to get those players. Yeah. And although realistically none of them are coming back next year except for maybe Iginla,
which makes me have a huge sigh of relief. I mean, at least it's not that roster year in and year out.
No, realistically, like Murray and Jokinen and Morrow being out the end of their terms will probably go to UFA and not get re-signed. But there is a high probability Iginla will stay there at a reduced rate. He won't be making 7.5 a year, more like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But
even that.
High probability that he does stay there. I'm very surprised. I'm totally surprised. I was not expecting Pittsburgh to just completely roll over like that. Granted, Boston is an incredibly physical team. They're a great team. Obviously, they had a storybook year and a really heart-wrenching year with the Boston bombing and a lot of expectation coming into the playoffs. And I think it really culminated for them when they came back in the Leafs series and they won with 10 minutes to go. I mean, they did something no team in the history of the NHL has ever done.
When you do that, it's such an energy push for your team.
That is the storybook ender right there. I mean, you are able to score 3 goals in the last 10 minutes of Game 7 to come back and not only tie the game but win it in overtime. That's something out of a movie. Like you see that on like the Mighty Ducks or something.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen in the NHL against professional teams. And for Boston to do that with the emotion around what their city experienced this year, I think, as much as I hate to say it as a Canucks fan, I think I got to give the cup to Boston just based on their season. But as we're about to discuss, it's not going to be easy against Chicago.
No, that's very true. We were both saying like it's going to be Boston in 6 or 7 if we had to put our money where our mouths were. But there's so much speculation that you can put into these two teams, and realistically, they're dead even. I mean, you got excellent coaching on both sides. You have excellent goaltending in this postseason, particularly from both goaltenders.
Yep.
Actually, the physical play
statistically,
goes.
It was reported on TSN today. They had a graph showing their stats, almost carbon copy of each other. Like their stats were almost directly even.
Yeah.
Rask and Crawford. They all roll 4 lines. I would say Boston's 4 lines are a little bit deeper in terms of scoring, but Chicago's got a lot of offensive depth as well.
And Boston's much more physical. What Chicago needs to utilize is their front line, top 3, top 4 talent. Because although Boston does have a lot of talent up on their upper end, if Taves and Kane and Hossa play to their maximum potential, there's very few players on Pittsburgh that can on Boston that can keep up with those guys.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think for Chicago to win this series, it goes without saying their best players have to be their best players. I mean, Kane
got hot at the right time though.
He got a hat trick in the last game. Hat trick Kane. Yeah, he was hot in the last game. Scored 3 goals, but he was 7 games pointless before then. Hossa has been sort of up and down. Sharp has probably been their most consistent performer.
Yeah.
Taves has been very good as always, but for them to beat Boston, Taves, Kane, and Hossa have to be on the top of their game. They have to rise above it because the one thing that Boston doesn't have, although they have more depth in scoring, they don't have breakout players like that can just win you games on their own. So if Chicago's best guys become their best guys, and that's including defense, if Keith and Seabrook really play to their full potential, I would almost give the series to Chicago at that point. But the only reason I'm still saying Boston is because I haven't seen that out of them yet. They've played well, but they haven't had to steal games yet.
Yeah.
This is their first true challenge of the playoffs, in my opinion. Even with Detroit almost knocking them out in 7, they still were able to beat Detroit without really, I think, playing to max potential.
Yeah.
And I think the dark horse for them really is Taves, because he probably, in my eyes, is the best current player in the NHL as far as leadership goes. He's the number 1 leader I see in the NHL. He's like a modern-day Mark Messier in that way. He will rally his troops in a way that no other captain in the league can rally them, and I think a lot of it's going to rest on his shoulders.
Now, do you have any comments to make about Sidney Crosby's performance in the previous series as well? Like, still, I know we covered the round last, but just because we're talking about Jonathan Toews as a captain, and a lot of people are comparing
him and Crosby in terms of leadership.
Yeah, well, and not only that, but I mean they're now looking at 2 of the best young captains in the NHL as far as they each have a Stanley Cup, they each have a gold medal, and this is Jonathan Toews' chance to win a second Stanley Cup and kind of have that
so you could almost
over Sidney, right? So when you talk about leadership, I was wondering that specific question because in the last round, to me, he kind of reverted to a younger Crosby, one that I actually complained about on the show.
Yeah, he wasn't
several times.
He wasn't his normal self.
No, we were talking.
You could see he was getting frustrated by that style of play.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that Jonathan Toews has that edge. That if Brad Marchand comes up and starts yapping to him, or
push him back,
or Chara wants to get a piece of him, that it's Toews has got a cooler head about him. And even when Toews loses his cool, as soon as the puck drops and when it's between the whistles, it doesn't matter. You might see him lose his cool after a whistle, but when that puck drops, he's back in it.
Crosby had some edge. Like, there was that moment, remember, in the first game against Chara where they were just screaming at each other, which was just awesome.
But he lost that battle, realistically. He backed down. He never talked to Chara again, and every time they met up on the ice, he got worked by him because he was almost afraid to look him in the eye. It's like he looked a dragon in the eye and was like, screw that.
Yeah.
Like, he had 1 second of fire there, and he didn't stick to his guns, and I think that's that's what cost him.
Very surprising because Crosby just doesn't normally have that in him. Like, he's normally that kind of guy, much like a Taves, that can carry a team on his back.
Yeah.
So that argument now lends, if Crosby wasn't able to do it, how the hell is Jonathan Taves?
That's exactly my
That's your
point.
point,
Is
yeah.
I like Jonathan Taves quite a lot, and I think his leadership is very strong, and he is my number one favorite Canadian captain. I mean, Tavares would be my other one.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, this is his chance right now to be like Crosby. Like, if there's any doubters out there about Jonathan Taves being as legendary as Crosby, it might not be on the score sheet, but championships. And that's like, if you want to go to basketball, that's everyone's talking about LeBron and Michael.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we have two guys right now that are going head to head, and that's comparing guys from the past and present. We have two guys right now, head to head, peak of their game, and Taves has a chance to get one up on him in championships. You don't get that opportunity often.
So that might put fire under Taves' belly to make him.
And I hope
up.
so, because I mean, like, we can go into our bias here. Both of us, as much as we know Boston has the better and upper hand here because of their physical game. Go Blackhawks! Are you kidding me?
I can't believe I'm saying that either.
I know, I love it. I want you to say it.
Go Blackhawks! I gotta have a cold shower.
The
after
most
this.
unenthusiastic.
Go Blackhawks! Yeah, it's tough for Canucks fans watching right now. That's for sure. Probably like what you felt when the Canucks played the Bruins.
Exactly.
several years ago.
Now you know my pain.
Yeah. Although I don't really have a problem with the Blackhawks. It's been so long since we were completely dominated by them that I don't think the rivalry is as fresh in people's minds as Boston's is. So I think more Canucks fans would be okay with cheering for Chicago. But yeah, going back to your point, you make a good point. I think ultimately, as I said, and this was underlined in my notes, Chicago is the better team, like Pittsburgh.
But because
they're like Pittsburgh, that is why they'll lose.
Yeah.
I think they're built a lot like the Penguins. They're very similar in terms of how the teams are built.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that will be their greatest weakness because the Bruins are built to beat teams like the Penguins and the Blackhawks.
But you have to remember, I mean, two of those Pittsburgh games were not. Two of them were blowouts, or only one was a blowout.
I think two of them were heavily stacked in
One
Boston's
was like
favor.
4-1 or 4-0.
Yeah.
6-0 was the big one.
Yeah, Boston was the better
But the
team.
other one was just like a double overtime win.
Yeah.
And if Chicago can find one little half step above what Pittsburgh did, it's a whole different series because Pittsburgh could have easily won two of those games.
Yeah,
and they just
Chicago
lost
is a little more plays with a little more edge, but not a lot more. I mean, Chicago
Yeah.
and Pittsburgh physically are very similar.
Yeah.
That's why so many people are wanting to see that matchup in the finals, just because they
That
play
would've been
such
amazing.
high flying hockey. You know.
Yeah.
But I think the way the Bruins are built, they play a better defensive system. As much as I like Quenneville as a coach, I still give Julian the coaching edge. I think he's more.
Really?
I think he's more adaptable.
Wow.
I think Quenneville's terrific as well, but I think Julian has proven that he could adapt very quickly to situations where Quenneville has never really had to do that because his team has always been so much better than everyone. This will test Quenneville, and the Blackhawks. See, this is why it's so hard to call because the Blackhawks may very well win. Like that's the thing is they may find that extra step that they haven't had to find.
yeah, and if they do,
they haven't had to find so
it's
far.
a whole different series than what we're talking about. The question is based on the performance of them so far. Like
Other
Kane
than-
hasn't been Kane.
other
right?
than the Detroit
And
series-
Taves took a series and a half to find himself.
Other than the Detroit series, they're very similarly matched in that sense. Because other than the Detroit series, Chicago hasn't really had to show up much, and other than the Toronto series, Boston hasn't really had to show up much. Like those were their only two real challenges.
I wonder if anyone's ever come back from 3-1 in a series against the Red Wings and won.
That's a stat.
That's an interesting stat. I'd like to check that out next time.
In their 80-year history, I'm sure somebody has.
Yeah, but it's not easy.
No, it isn't. But I mean, that was a big character win for the Blackhawks as well, much like the Bruins against the Leafs was a character win.
And the defending Stanley Cup champion. I mean, like that's another morale booster for them as well. When you knock out, like normally it seems in our NHL lives after the last lockout that the team that makes it to the finals normally doesn't make the playoffs next year.
Yeah.
But LA had the opportunity of a shortened season, and when they really were at the same exact roster that they were last year when they won the Cup, and they were in the Western Conference Finals. I mean, Chicago has to look at that as another big win. They took out the Stanley Cup champions of last year. This is not long ago, considering the roster has undergone no changes, essentially.
Yeah.
And they took them out in 5 games. And Jonathan Quick was easily the best goaltender in the playoffs. And Rask can't really... I mean, he could say that now he is after another series, but
that's why it's
Quick
gonna be
was at that point.
It's why it's going to be such a fun matchup because both teams have been largely dominant in their respective conferences in the playoffs so far, other than the first round for Boston and Chicago against Detroit. But I mean, even Chicago against Detroit, it was only really the first couple games where Chicago didn't show up, and once they found their edge, it was all Chicago for the rest of the series. They won in four straight games. So I mean, once again, I got to go back to the Toronto thing. I have to use that because I think that's what gives Boston their edge. they did something completely improbable. And I think that's what gives them their edge. Once again, I'll say it, they play a better defensive system. They're a little bit deeper in all 4 of their lines. Chicago has a great 3rd and 4th line, but their 3rd and 4th lines
I'll keep playing devil's advocate.
Don't score on the same clip as Boston's, other than Bickle, who's the exception, who's playing outstanding.
Yeah.
But largely, a lot of his goals have been on the power play with Kane and Taves. Remember
That's
that.
right.
So, and I think Boston is deeper offensively. I think they're slightly better coached. I think they have a slight edge in goaltending. They have Chara, which is huge.
I'm going to turn the table on you, though, right now. Let's remember that these Boston Bruins almost lost in 7 games to the Toronto Maple Leafs.
This is true. But the reason
they did get a jump off that, but they've played extremely physical and extremely high energy since then. Yeah. That takes a lot out of you.
You know why?
Chicago has played a pretty quiet round 1 in 5 games, had to really turn it on against the Red Wings, but honestly, I mean, like,
they were
Kane
dominant.
was scoreless in 4 games against the Kings, and they still beat him in 5 games.
Yeah.
So you could also argue that Boston is as although they've won more efficiently, they've spent more energy, and when you go into they've had a few days to rest, but it's in Chicago, and like a couple games where you're like, okay, these guys are fast. All of a sudden, you're down 2 games going home, and that's not an easy hill to climb.
No.
So Chicago does have a couple slight upper hands in that scenario as well.
I agree with you. I think the main reason Boston almost lost to Toronto is because they're pretty much the same team in terms of how they play. Toronto is the only team in the league, I think, that can match Boston's physicality.
Yeah.
And Boston is built to be the toughest team.
Well, I think they also had a bit of a mentality like the Penguins did against the Bruins, saying like, oh, it's the Leafs, we got this.
Yeah. They definitely wrote them off a little bit, but I do give the Leafs credit for being built much like the way the Bruins are built, and that's what seems to be winning championships right now is size. LA won last year with size as well. They're a very tough team. Yeah. So, I mean, I think
who Chicago just beat.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? But the Bruins, I do think, are
way more
this
physical.
year a much more physical team and a much deeper team than LA is. And I think the reason the Bruins had so much trouble against Toronto is because they're so similar in terms of how they play. Toronto really threw their weight around and really caught them off guard. And I don't know if Chicago could match that. I'm guaranteeing you they won't match that physically.
No, which means they'll have to control the pace of the game.
Unless Bickle just turns into like the Hulk or something.
Yeah, exactly. But if they push the pace of the game, they keep it fast, they have a solid shot. And I mean, like, regardless of...
Well, you made a good point before the show started. Chicago has to come out flying. They have to steal the first 2 games and make it so Boston just doesn't have a chance to recover.
Yeah.
That's really not their only shot, but their biggest advantage is they got to come out hard. This is their first real test, even over Detroit. I'd say this is their first real test. And
Detroit didn't become a test until they let it become one, being down 3-1.
Exactly.
They dug their own hole.
They did that to themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying Quenneville can't outcoach Julian. I just think with Boston's size and their depth and the way they're playing their system right now, I have to give it to Boston. It pains me to say this, but I think Boston will win in 7. I think it will go to 7 games, potentially 6. But regardless,
7's in Chicago, right? So
yeah, I think regardless of who wins the series, I think it's going to 7. And I'm picking Boston, not by much. I mean, it is a pick'em like a lot of the series have been this playoffs. Chicago could win.
Game 1's going to speak volumes though, because every Game 1 winner so far has won their round this postseason.
This is true. Game 1 is huge.
I don't know how often that happens, where every single round is determined within the first game.
Another great stat to look up.
Yeah, I know. Hey, all these crazy ones, but if that's the case, look for these teams to come out swinging in Game 1, because they're not going to want to give an inch to each other.
No, I'm really excited about this series. There's so many question marks. That's the thing for me. It's like, as much as we've just spent dissecting it, and as much as I want to say I feel confident about picking one team, like so many.
That's not a possible statement in this scenario.
No, it's just
you can't be 100% confident picking. I bet you the odds in Vegas are next to the same.
Yeah. There's so much of a question mark right now, but I used the storybook scenario again, much like I did against Ottawa, which obviously at the end of the day didn't work out for them. But Boston is not Ottawa; they're a much deeper team.
Yeah,
I think the way Boston responded to the tragedies that happened in their city this year. How classily their organization handled it. Oh, it's paining me to say this right now.
They have another injury to rally around, like Horton. Now it's Campbell.
Yeah, tell me about that. Well, you were saying you before the show, you were in something that I hadn't thought about. There was one shift in particular you were focusing on. That's saying there was a big shift that really changed momentum.
You don't know about this Campbell shift where he took a puck?
You talking where he broke his leg?
Yeah,
Is that the one you were referring to? Oh, okay. I thought there was something else that I'd missed.
No.
Oh, that Campbell was unreal.
Yeah.
Like, didn't he finish the shift?
Yeah, he finished the shift 45 more seconds, killing a penalty.
With a broken leg.
I had this conversation with a friend, though. Okay, first of all, the rule with the injuries is correct me if I'm wrong, but if the player
You're wrong!
if the player's unable to move, if he's down, then the play is stopped.
Yeah.
It's only if the player can struggle around that the play stops when his team takes possession. Or whatever.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, Campbell, Iron Man, and
he's a hero. Why didn't he just play dead?
But like
he broke his leg.
I know, like it's not playing dead man. You're not screwing around. You're not faking anybody out. You broke your leg, or they determined it was a pelvic muscle.
Maybe he just has so much.
But the second, I guarantee you that he regretted the second he stood up, because as soon as you see him go up on one leg,
they continue play.
It's just like, oh my god. Well, maybe they're continuing play.
Things happen so fast in hockey. Maybe he just didn't realize.
Yeah, the adrenaline goes, and he just gets up.
He gets up, and he's like, "Wait a second, I have one leg right now. Why?"
There's no way it's Campbell's fault, because there's so many factors at play. It's such a fast game.
Yeah,
but I mean, realistically, the smarter hockey play was to let the whistle get blown and start the penalty kill with 4 regular strength.
Well, remember the Boston Bruins do have 9 illiterate hockey players. You have to remember this.
Really?
Yeah, that's a stat.
Oh
Look it up.
That's a stat.
Obviously.
Sweet lord. Yeah, but it's the Bruins. That's why I'm keen to believe you.
Yeah, that's another thing I was going to say is I hate Marchand so much, yet I love him because he's just so good at what he does. He's such an effective grinder. He gets under people's skin and then he scores a goal. Like the thing, the Torres thing.
But he only does it. He only does it when he's scoring. That's the good thing about Marchand.
Or Cook. Sorry, that. Okay, this is a funny story from the last one, which we didn't cover.
Yeah.
Cook was riling up Marchand the entire series, and finally he just swipes at his head, and Marchand almost loses his cool and Cook makes him take the penalty. It's so funny because they're so similar in terms of how they play. Marchand being more skilled, but they're both pests. They both grind and they both get under their opponent's skins. Marchand was so close to just leveling Cook, and then he was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to be the bigger man. And what does he do? 10 seconds later, he scores the game-winning goal. On the same shift.
Yeah.
He looks Cook straight in. This is going to be a GIF for the next 5 years. He looks Cook straight in the eye and just sort of does the nah. He turns around, gets the pass, not even 10 seconds, 5 seconds. Gets the pass, snipes a top shelf game winner. And then he looks right back at Cook, and it's just like, what? And Cook just has nothing to say. He's like, you just made me look like a complete idiot.
Yeah.
And that is why, as much as I hate Marchand, I love him because he's like... He's the most skilled. He's like the new Wendell Clark. He's like the most skilled goon I've ever seen.
The reason you have to have respect for that, like
maybe
a lot of
people
are against that game type strategy because
it's effective.
But it works. Well, not only is it effective, but he does it when he's playing well. You back up the crazy antics and the diving and all that, like embellishment, all that stuff. You back it up by scoring goals and making passes and making plays. You can't be that guy if you're playing like crap. No. And Marchand knows. Marchand does have a lot of slumps. He's not consistently a great player.
No.
Shows up in the playoffs,
but he can do it.
But he can do it. Yeah. But that's what I'd love to see is in the regular season, he gets emotionally frustrated and blah this and blah that, but he doesn't do what he does when he's on. So that's a big statement because like he knows not to just be a cocky jerk.
Yeah.
When he can't back it up with play.
Yeah.
And so that's what's great.
He's playing really well right now and he's got a lot of confidence. It's old time hockey. Like that's what the Bruins. That's what the Bruins really signify to me. Is they're playing a style of hockey that
Broad Street bully style
is reminiscent of hockey in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Just a different kind of game where players held themselves accountable.
Which is funny because in those eras, the winning team. Montreal most likely was Montreal Canadiens in the decades you're talking about. And their team was not that style. No, it was always fast and flashy.
They were the exception because in the 70s they were just stacked with like 15 Hall of Famers, right? So I mean, it's just you couldn't.
Yeah, power forwards.
Arguably, next to the dynasty Oilers of the 80s, that 70s Habs team was the best hockey team ever assembled.
Yeah,
some people even say maybe better than the Oilers team.
Well, you can't really compare it ever.
It's a different era. It's hard to say. I mean, they both teams were so stacked with Hall of Famers that just won't ever happen again, probably.
Yeah. Well, now we have it looks like 4 or 5 equal Stanley Cup contenders that just like to go at it year after year right now.
And that's what I love about the NHL because of that parity, right? I mean, every year, you never know. It could be a different team. This year being the exception, you having the last 5 teams in the playoffs being the last cup-winning team.
But still, the back-to-back is out. The back-to-back possibility is out.
That's like hasn't happened in like years. Yeah, I mean that's the thing.
No, wait, we were wrong about that because the Detroit Red Wings. You corrected me. We kept saying on a lot of we have to make this actually because we said it.
You're right.
On several shows we've said that the last back-to-back Stanley Cup champions are the 1991-92 Pittsburgh Penguins, but they're not.
In fact, the Red Wings,
Detroit Red Wings,
96 and 96 and 97. You're correct. Yeah.
97-98.
97, 98, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, 96 was Colorado.
Yeah.
97, 98. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So, but I was more referring to how, like, you look at other sports, like the basketball playoffs going on right now, baseball, you always seem to know who's going to win in baseball and basketball.
Oh, yeah.
Football is
baseball more so. Basketball, actually, I don't even like basketball except for the last couple of seasons because it's become more evenly matched, actually. It's not as stacked.
In some ways, yeah.
I mean, even LeBron, like, obviously LeBron James, but that's like watching the Penguins. It's like, yeah, they're a little bit better, but there's still the chance they're going to get, swept by the Bruins, apparently.
Yeah. Well, they're playing San Antonio, who's won plethora of championships as well.
Yeah, exactly.
They were like the Heat of old, having so many championships back in the early 2000s and such. But yeah, I mean, that's why I like hockey. It's a lot like football. Every year is different. You never really know who's going to come out on top. This year was the strange one with the 5 teams that had won the cup, which we discussed previously.
And not only that, no real Cinderella team. I mean, you could argue that these are 2 of the top 4 teams in the NHL, straight up. And a lot of, like, LA wasn't in that scenario the last year when they won the cup. They were the Cinderella team, and so that happens a lot in the NHL, where you see a Cinderella or 8th or 7th seed make it to the Stanley Cup Finals. And this year, it's 2 heavyweight contenders that played good hockey all year.
Which means we're probably going to have one hell of a series.
Oh, man, I hope so. I hope it does. Like, that's the thing. Like, LA and Chicago was, okay, 5 games at least LA won one.
That was a very good series.
It was a very good series nonetheless.
Boston, Pittsburgh,
4
not so
games
much.
in Boston, it was kind of boring. But I still just want to see more hockey. I mean, this is our last games of the year. Let's get 7 in there. Let's see 7 games, boys.
I really want there to be 7 games.
Like, even like 4 or 5 games, even if it's good hockey, it's only 4 or 5 games and it's over. Like, you didn't put up enough of a fight.
I really hope they adapt a new strategy, though, where they start the season at the beginning of September, because I hate the NHL season ending at the end of June. That just seems so ludicrous to me.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
In the late, like, starting summer, like that, I don't dig that. I think they got to start the season earlier and end it earlier. You don't need to play less games necessarily. Maybe bring it down to 75 or 80, but I mean, just start it earlier. But having hockey go this long is just weird. Like, hockey shouldn't be played in the summer. It shouldn't be played when it's 40.
Well, this is partly to do with the lockdown.
Yeah, this is a bit stranger than usual. You're absolutely correct with that. And obviously there are a couple big things still happening. Like, you got the draft coming up, which is going to be awesome to watch. We're going to have a show about that. You got the you got July 5th. You got the free agent frenzy, which is going to be a huge day. But after that, it's pretty much 2 months of nothing.
Training camp.
We're probably not even going to be broadcasting until training camp in September, just because there really isn't a whole lot to talk about after free agent frenzy. Yeah. So you are correct in the sense where I'm happy that it is going on as long as possible, so we can get as much hockey as we possibly can. We're not even getting an award ceremony this year. They're all being handed out over the phone. Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Rumor is Subban's winning the Norris.
Heavily
rumored. He's going.
Why is that heavily rumored?
Reports are getting leaked out of the head office because they've apparently already picked the winners. They're just waiting to announce them
after the playoffs.
Yeah. So apparently, it looks like Subban's got the Norris.
That'd be amazing. What about the Calder? Give it to Gallagher.
Gallagher is a high probability of winning it.
I know, eh?
I think he probably will. Maybe Huberdeau,
because we didn't get a nomination for the Jack Adams. I'm stoked on the Norris. I wanted at least 2 pieces of hardware.
Yeah,
we didn't even get a nomination.
That was ridiculous.
That was ridiculous.
You got shafted.
So without a nomination, like, come on, let's go Norris and let's go Calder. That'd be awesome.
Yeah,
we got the division title too. So
yeah, great. Yeah. We'll see how you do next year.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, better, because our team was young.
It's true.
Yeah, you watch Gallagher next year, buddy. You're gonna regret. You're gonna eat those words.
No, I don't disagree with that. I think he's gonna be terrific next year. Absolutely.
Galchenyuk, Subban, when you're better, trying to earn that contract, because he'll be a free agent after that.
Carey Price,
same deal.
Yeah.
Oh man, we're gonna be a good team next year, my friend.
I think you guys will be. You have definitely more to look forward to than the Canucks. The Canucks are more in a question mark phase.
The realignment. So better chance of making the playoffs if you don't win your division or don't win your conference.
Realignment will help us a lot as well. The Canucks will have less travel time. So yeah, a bit of a shorter show today. Obviously, less to talk about. There's only one series to go. But it was a fun time. We hope you guys enjoyed the Stanley Cup Finals. It's sure to be an amazing series, and hopefully it goes to 7 games so we can get as much hockey in as possible before the season ends.
Before we have to start watching that international crap.
Sigh. It flew by, man. It flew by. It flew by so fast. Seems like just yesterday we were broadcasting the first show.
Yeah, I know, eh?
So yeah, I had a blast with you this year, bud. We'll have a few more shows probably before our series ends for this season. And my name's Andy Cole.
And my name's Justin Boniface. Thanks for listening.
Have a good night.